We'll do a review in Likutei Sichas in Chelek Tazayin, volume 16, the first sicha for the parsha of Shemos. So this sicha is a Rashi sicha. Rashi explains the meaning of Vayokom Melech Chodosh, that a new king arose in Egypt. And Rashi brings down the two pirushim, whether it was a new king or literally a new king, or it means a king that his decrees were renewed. And the Rebbe explains in the first, the beginning of the sicha, in the first ois, exactly, very clearly and beautifully, why Rashi has to explain both of these explanations, how they're both in the Pshuta Shel Mikra, and why the first one, that it was a really new king, is the real one that is closer to the Pshat. But then the rest of the Sikha goes away in trying to explain why Rashi mentions the names of the authors of the statement of Rav and Shmuel. Why does Rashi bring that down? And along that path, the Rebbe brings down various different machlokes between Rav and Shmuel, and that the Gemara brings down. And Rebbe explains how Rav and Shmuel have the lishitosei, that they go by their line of thinking, and everything aligns. Rav's views and all the various different psukim, how he interprets them, goes with the idea that you have to go by the literal meaning of the verse. And Shmuel goes more, his line of thinking is you have to go by the idea of the whole contents of the portion over there. And the Rebbe says, but Rashi, that would be something in the Gemara that we can follow one line of thinking for Rav and one for Shmuel. That would be one reason for bringing down the Rav, to show that this is just Rav's way of thinking. That's why he interprets it one way and Shmuel the other way. But the Rebbe says in Rashi doesn't bring down in all his commentaries the names of Rav and Shmuel, so we have to look for another answer. The Rebbe goes away and explains that we know the halacha is like Rav when it comes to matters of Isur v'heter. When you talk about prohibition and there is a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel, the halacha is like Rav. And when it comes to monetary issues, then the halacha is like Shmuel. And the reason is because Rav was mainly occupied in the laws of Isur v'heter, so he had a deeper appreciation and understanding in the laws Isur v'heter, that is between Hashem and the people. And Shmuel was more involved in monetary situations, so he had the more of an appreciation of how things are between interpersonal relation between people. And the differences between their opinions explains that Rav takes into consideration mostly as it impacts Shamayim. That's why he interprets Melech Chodosh, meaning a brand new king. And Shmuel mainly takes into consideration the interpersonal between Adam Lachaveiroi, and that's why, according to that, it's more fitting. Okay, but that's just some of the highlights, but it's a long, detailed sicha, and we'll do it piece by piece. Let's look inside Ois Aleph. Shemos Ois Aleph. From Posik Vayokom Melech Chodesh al Mitzrayim Asher lo yoda es Yosef. A new king, the Posik says, stood up on Egypt that did not know Yosef. Stellt sich Rashi, if the Werte, Rashi based themselves on the words from the Posik Vayokom Melech Chodesh. So the Posik of Vayokom Melech Chodesh und is mefarish Rav and Shmuel. Rav says there is a disagreement between Rav and Shmuel. Chad Omar Chodosh Mamish. One of the two says that it was actually a new king, meaning the previous king Pari died and there's a new Pari now. Chad Omar, and one says that the decrees. It wasn't a new king, but it was a new decrees that he brought about. So it's the same king, the same party, but his gezeres were renewed. The Rebbe will say later on in the sicha that in most cases, when it says Rav and Shmuel, or it says the names of the authors of the statement, and then it says one said so and one said so. So basically, the first one, the Chad Omar, is the Rav, and the other Chad Omar is Shmuel. So basically, it's as if it says that the Rav is the one that says it was Chodesh Mamish, a new king, and Shmuel is the one that says it's Chashik Zereisov. It's written in a way, one and one, but the first one is the first Chad Omar, and the second Shmuel is the second Chad Omar in this case. That's the Rebbe brings that down later on. So the Mokher from the Pirush Rashi is in Gemara. The source for this Rashi's commentary is in the Gemara. Und the Gemara is dort masbir dem Hechrech und the Meile von jeden von die zwei Pirushim. The Gemara over there explains the proof and the advantage of each one of these two commentaries. What is the proof behind they said what they said? Manda Omar Chodesh Mamish, the view that says, Rav, that says, actually new, Tiksiv Chodesh, the Torah says a new king got up, and a new means new. So that's his evidence. Manda Omar Shenis Chachuk Zeireisov. What about the one who says that the decrees have been renewed? His proof is, his evidence is, like Siva Yomas Vayimlach, doesn't say that he died and he became king. It just says a new king got up. Why doesn't it say that he died and he king? It's a simon that the other one never died. It's just a new king. So the Rebbe is going to explain now why Rashi brings down both Pirushim and why Rashi brings down the advantage of the first Pirush that comes first. So the Rebbe says, Rashi is mefarish nor pshuta shamikra, even though Rashi only explains the literal meaning of the posuk. Von deswegen breiter Pirushim, and yet he brings down both of these Pirushim. Weil der Hechrech von jeder von sie is vom Pshat, because the proof that forces us to say like that interpretation is from the little meaning. And therefore, Rashi brings both, because we have evidence for both of them. Damit is euch move on. That's what we also understand. Favos Rashi is mighty from posik euch de Werter Vayokom Melech. Rashi explains the words Chodosh. What does Chodosh means? But Rashi quotes from the posik also the words a king stood up, because this is the Peshat evidence for these two Pirushim. Hagam azer taiched up nor Chodosh, although he only translates the word Chodosh. Warum in dem Wort Vayokom besteht der Hechrech von dem zweiten Pirush. Because in the wording of Vayokom over there is the evidence for the second interpretation. The Loikesiv, it just says Vayokom, stood up, doesn't say king. So Rashi brings down Vayokom to point to the evidence, which the second Pirush. Und in dem Wort Melech, Vayokom Melech, der Hechrech vom ersten Pirush. Because a new king got up, Vayokom Melech Chodosh, not a new Gzeirah. So therefore, Rashi brings them down. So that's why Rashi brings down both interpretations. But still, the first interpretation comes first, the idach, on the other hand. Although that in each one of these two commentaries, there is an advantage. That also automatically causes a difficulty to the other interpretation, because if it's advantage for one, brings a difficulty for the other one. But as mentioned, spoken many times, the Erster Pirush mer korev l'pshuto shel mikra. The first interpretation that Rashi brings is closer to the simple meaning of the pasuk, and that's why it's first. So the Rebbe is going to give now 3 reasons why Weil, because the reason why the first interpretation that it's really a new king is the one that is closer to the simple meaning of the pasuk. Number 1, Aleph. The pashtus is mer mistaber zogen as chodosh meint chodosh mamash. Simply, it is more logical to say that new means not renewed gezer, but it means actually new. New gezeres is not really a new king. Here we're saying a king makes gezeres. So chodosh means a new king. Chodosh man, not new gezeres from a king. Unit as we bal gezeres is yon the melech. Since not to say as the second one says that a king makes gezeres. Is chidush the gezeres, chidush the melech. So when there is a new gezeres, that means there's a new melech. There's a new vayokom melech chodosh, a new gezeres. That's not the more logical, simple way. Yaakov Melech Chodesh means a king, a new one, not the Exodus of the king. Number 1, Beis. Number 2, Leuten Zweiten Pirush. According to the second one, not only is Chodesh not literally, but also the words Asher Lo Yoda as Yosef, that he didn't know Yosef, is also not translated literally, because it's the same king. He knew Yosef. He knew what Yosef did for the people. So then Asher Lo Yodas Yosef, Rashi teaches. The Rebbe shows that this Lo Yodas Yosef goes according to the second interpretation, that since he made new gezeres, Asher Lo Yodas Yosef pretended not to know Yosef, which is also not the simple meaning. Asher Lo Yodas Yosef means he didn't know Yosef. That's another difficult. Wait, let's look inside. Leit and Zweiten Pirush, according to the second interpretation, that this was a renewal of the decrees, Musman Taichen. So you have to interpret Asher Lo Yoda. What is Asher Lo Yoda? Osa Atzmei Ki'ilu Lo Yoda, that he made himself as if he didn't know. The Gemara is Masbir, as the Gemara explains. The Rebbe is going to point out that this interpretation that he made himself like he didn't know is only according to the second interpretation, that it was the same king, so he knew Yosef. Rashi is domedayik to schreiben ve'asher lo yoda. Rashi adds the vav. It says ve'asher lo yoda, not asher lo yoda, not the end who did know. Also atzmoi ki'ilu lo yoda. He made himself. He pretended not to know. So Rashi is moise avav achibur. So Rashi adds a connecting vav on the language of the pasuk. The pasuk says asher lo yoda. Rashi says ve'asher lo yoda. Rashi wants to emphasize as that pirush also that this that he's making pretended not to know is that this is a follow-up to the second interpretation that he made new decrees that says right beforehand that he didn't know Yosef, and therefore he pretended not to know, as to Rashi's trying to tell you that only according to this shot he pretended not to know. But according to the first pirush, is Euch der Teich also the translation from Asher Lo Yoda? Also Asher Lo Yoda means Kipshot a little, not Osasmin, not it pretended, but it didn't know. So according to the first interpretation in Chodesh, that it's a new king, a Chodesh, a new king that didn't know Yosef. That's simple. According to the second interpretation, we have to not only say that he was a new king that Nur Gzeres, and then we have to add that he pretended not to know Yosef. So that's this additional difficulty. That's why that pshat comes first. And Gimel, euch die Schwierigkeit liegt in ersten Pirush. Also, the whole difficulty, according to the first interpretation, what's the problem? It just says Vayokum. It doesn't say Vayimlech Vayomos. It doesn't say Vayimlech. It says Vayokum Elechodesh. It's not such a strong difficulty. That's not a challenge. It's not such a strong challenge. The Torah kommt doch nicht zu der Erzählung der Divrei Yomim von Malchei Mitzrayim. Torah is not intending to tell us the history from the kings of Egypt. Only the part that is connected to Yid. As gelitten von neue schwere Geseres, that they suffered from new, difficult decrees. So these details that the king, that he died and then a new king got up, is not important. Nor did it other. We only need to know the result. As it relates to Yidden, we want to know. The new king got up here. This was a melech. That there was a new king that got up against the Jews with new decrees. But the king got up. So it's not such a question. Why does it say why should we not talk about history? So for all these three reasons, is the erste pirush nentet zum Pshutus al Mikra. The first one is that a chodosh means a new one. We avoid all these three issues. Chodosh means a new king. Shalayodas Yosef means literally he didn't know Yosef. And problem by Yimlech Vayomas doesn't talk about here who died, and then it just tells you a new king making new trouble. So that's why Rashi quotes that first. However, the question is, why does Rashi have to say Rabbi Shmuel? Rashi could make two interpretations. Why are the names important over here? So the Rebbe says that it would possibly be answered by quoting in other places where Rashi, where we find machlokes between the Rav and Shmuel, and the Rav goes by the literal translation. So over here, he would say Chodosh Nu means Melech Chodosh. And Shmuel goes more by the storyline, and the storyline would necessitate that it's talking about not a new king, but a new decrees, as we find in other places. The Rebbe is going to go through a whole lot of examples, and then the Rebbe is going to say, but Rashi does not always use the name Rabbi Shmuel, so that's not really going to answer the question, as the Rebbe is going to continue in the sicha. Base. Based on this, we can also explain the reason. Was Rashi bringt up the Nemen from the Manda Omar's Rabbi Shmuel? Why Rashi brings the names of the authors of the statement Rabbi Shmuel? Was Vigeretche Filmo, we've already spoken many times. Bringt Rashi Arop the Nomen from Bala Maimer. Rashi only brings the name of the author. Only if this answers a difficulty in his commentary, was der weckt sich by a Talmud Memulach that arises by a sharp student. Warum der Mit is Musber der Tam von Zeir Machlokes. The names are brought down. Rashi doesn't just bring down the names. He explains, this gives some explanation. Why are they arguing? Why is each one saying what they're saying? So in this case, the Rebbe says that we're bringing down Rabbi Shmuel over here to give you an explanation for a difficulty, and this explains it. As the pastors dapen onemen, Rebbe says first he wants to establish that the first statement comes from Rav and the second from Shmuel. As a pastor is not an ornament that simply we have to accept as in the machloikesum with the Gemara zokt frier, Shmeis Bale HaMaimer. In those disagreements with the Gemara, first mentions the names of the authors who said the statement. And then it says Chad Omer Chulu, Chad Omer Chulu. One said so, one says so. Is Bechlal, generally speaking, that Eshter Chad Omar, the first Chad Omar, there was the Gemara zokt frier. The Gemara mentions first. And der zweite was Werder Mont später. And this one is much better. So that means that the first one, so the Bal HaMaimer, and then it says Chad Omar, is der erster Chamer, that was the Gemara zokt frier. In our case, it would be Rav, because he's the one that mentioned first. Und der zweite Chad Omar was very much better, that would be Shmuel. So basically, the Rebbe is trying to say to you that Rav said Melech Chodosh, and Shmuel says Nischat Gzeres. Okay, the Rebbe establishes that, and that's the assumption, and that's what the rest of the sicha goes by. So the Rebbe says in Kama, so now we can explain that how this Rav and Shmuel in our Rashis explains that reasoning for their machlokes. In Kama machlokes in the Rav and Shmuel, Bepirish HaKsuvim, was the Gemara brings. I mean, in several machlokes, many machlokes of Rav and Shmuel, explaining the psukim that the Gemara brings. And the Gemara brings a whole list of machlokes of Rav and Shmuel, but especially those who the Gemara says a whole list of things. Rav and Shmuel, one says so and one says so. So that meant al shitose for yeder and for zeh. So you see how there is a line of thought, al shitose, following the view from each one of them. They follow the same concept that manifests itself in each one of the statements. What it is over here, you see, is that Erster, the first one, which is Rav, nemt als iker dem Wort. He takes the word, or the verter, or several words. Hagam as lifizeh is nitglat der teuchen. Although that the contents, the subject matter is not so smooth, he'll go by the word. Der zweiter, the second one, which is Shmuel, is machriya leuten teuchen. He decides based upon what fits better in the contents, in the subject. Der zweite is malederne von die psukim, from the verses. Chotz as lifizeh is nit glatik der Teich von dem Wort, although by making it fit in the subject matter, it's not so smooth to translate from the Wort or the Werter from the word of the word. Ludugma. I'm going to bring you various psukim which we see Rav from the Gemara over there, which various psukim that Rav is mostly concerned with the translation of the word, and Shmuel is mostly concerned that it should fit into the concept. Aleph, but the Rebbe is going to say this is a good idea, but in Rashi this doesn't fit because Rashi doesn't bring down these names. But first we're going the idea the way it's in the Gemara. This is talking about Yosef when he came home. It says he came to the house of Parei, not the house of Parei, to the Potiphar, the city's Parei. So he came to the home over there. And it says the posse, he came to the house, Lasses Malachte, to do his work. We know that Yosef was a worker, he was sold to the Potiphar, to this Parei as an Eved by the Yishmael that brought him to Mitzrayim. So he came home to do his work. Or stayed by Yosef, and it says by Yosef. So the Gemara, but the Gemara says, what is the meaning? Rav Shmuel, one says, one says he came to do his work, came to do his job. He was a slave there, came to do his work. One says, no, came to do his work doesn't mean literally his work. He came to do his needs. He wanted to be intimate with Eishes Peitifar. The Eshter Taich Melachte Mamesh, the first translation, we say actions work, Leutun Pirush HaPoshet from Bar. That would follow the simple meaning of the word. But when you look in the flow of the subject matter, was there pasuk is noch the meisif right afterward it says, Ve'ein ishma anshe habayis shel baboyis, and there is nobody there at home, is mashma. So over here it appears at the Torah kum der mit aufklären was meint malachtoi. It is coming. The Torah is coming to explain what does it mean. The malachta is coming to do his work while there's nobody at home. It is such a job that requires there should be nobody home at that time while the job. So this is the subject matter seems to imply he wasn't just coming to do work. He had something else, something which no people should be there around. The Riber, that's why V'chad Omar, that's what the other one would say, Shmuel would say, as Malachte meant Lasis Tzrachov, that Malachte means to do his needs. But for Nachad, it was a little different. Because in this case, you can still argue, no, he came to do his work. And then the Torah tells you, oh, it so happens, and therefore it happened. So it was a little different. Abe nicht given by Yovei Haboiso. If not for the fact that then ein ish ma'an shabayis, when there is nobody home, he would not get there. Eishes Potiphar has been after him for a while. Why is he coming to the house over there when there's nobody else home? After she already told him, lie with me. And day after day, she was talking to Yosef Lishkavetzla to lie next to her gomer. So, why is he coming there? So, that is the chmuvon that is rein lasis tzrachim. So there's the connotation here that really he came is to do tzrachim. Vayovoi habayso, because v'yein ish mi'anshe habayis, because otherwise he would not come there. That's his mashma from the hemshech onyar. So that would be the another example. Then we have another example, Gimel, another example. So the simple meaning of the pasuk is lachtoi, work. That's the taich. But when you start seeing what the discussion, this idea over there, then you say no. So which is the two? Rav chooses malachtei mamish. That's the taich of the pasuk. Shmuel says no. We got to follow what the idea of the contents of the story. Gimel. Another base. Pasuk in Megillas Esther. Megillas Esther, in the verse, it says there that Achashverosh was a king, mehoidu ve'at kush. From hoidu to kush. So the Gemara is trying to, the pasuk is similar sentence, all the ways from hoidu, all the ways to kush, from one end of the world to the other end of the world. That's a simple meaning. But later on, the Torah says he was king over 127 countries. Why would the Torah repeat once you said already? So that tells you Mahiduvat Kush means that they were next to each other. Let's look inside. Base. Megillah Esther, Mahiduvat Kush. On the verse in Megillah Esther, which says Mahiduvat Kush, the Gemara says Rav Shmuel, that we have here a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. Chad Omar, one says, Rav says, we're going by the line, the Rebbe says that the first one is Rav. So Rav Shmuel Chad Omar, Rav says, one says, Hoidu, B'Soifa Ilam, B'Kush, B'Soifa Ilam, that Hoidu is in one end of the world and Kush in the other end of the world. Chad Omar, one says, Hoidu V'Kush, Gabe Hadod, Dehavi Kaimi, that Hoidu and Kush were next to each other. Kishem Shamolach al Hoidu V'Kush, Kach Molach B'Soifa Ilam, B'Soifa, just as he was king over Hoidu and Kush that were next to each other. So that means that you can sort of be fully king. So also Kach Molach B'Soifa Ilam, B'Soifa was also over the end of the world, from the end of the world to the other end of the world, which means not literally. Gemara brings very similar thing to this. You also say, it says in the pasuk, in the pasuk that he was ruler in the whole other side of the river from Tifsach to Aza. So which literally Tifsach and Aza, Rabbi Shmuel Chulu, whether Tifsach and Aza were next to each, were corner extreme far in the world, corners of the world, which would literally to Aza, or according to Shmuel, no. It means that they were next to each other, and just like he ruled from Tifsach to Aza, so he ruled over the rest of the world. What is the logic behind it? Chad is mefarish umadgish the word ad. One, Rav, he explains and emphasizes the word ad. Kipshut means literally. It says from here, metifsach va'ad aza, mehoidu va'ad, from here until here, which means all the ways. Ad amercha kishatach. We're talking about a distance in area from here all the ways to there. So what is the meaning and what is the big deal from hoidu va'ad kush? Means for ein kotzer olam bis zum zweiten kotzer, from one corner of the world to the other corner of the world. Aber von dem was es steht in pasuk noch dem. But the fact that later on in pasuk it says Sheva v'esru mei medina, 127 countries, which already includes all the world. That may have to say that mehoidu va'at kush. What does it mean till kush? Doesn't mean need kipirush haposhut. Doesn't mean as a simple meaning. From one extreme, from one corner to the other corner, was damos is doch koifel dem damos is dos koifel themselves in zwei. Then you're duplicating. You're saying 127, saying again. So why are you duplicating the same thing twice? The faris v'chad omar. That's why the other one says that the posuk madgish zayin. Shmuel says that the posuk is coming to emphasize. As kishem shemolach al hoidu v'kush, just like he was king of hoidu v'kush, kach molach. So it's just like, it's not ad literally. What we're saying, he's kinged over these two places, and just like he did, it's likewise molach b'sefer tzofel. That's not pshat in the literal. It's a figuratively to emphasize the great and the force of his government, that just like he can control these two, he also controlled the whole world like that. But that's not the literal translation. So again, you see Rav goes by the simple taich. Ad means until, which means extreme in area. And according to him, because we don't need that, because the already says Medinos, that's why we're going to say that it's kishem, that we're next to each other. And ad is not kipshuta. So those are what the Gemara brings over here by explaining. And the Gemara brings another two examples. Dalet, the tzvei deyes, the tzvei machloikesun. There's the two arguments, was the Gemara brings frier, that the Gemara brings earlier, before far the machloikes, unser pasuk. The Gemara brings before the machloikes in our pasuk. It says, "Vayokom melech chodesh." So first it says in our pasuk in Vayokom melech chodesh. There psukim earlier in the Chumash Bereishis. So over there it says, "Vahi b'mei Amrafel." It was during the days of Amrafel, the Parshas Lech Lecha, So that's talking about when they built the Tower of Babel, and question is, who is this Amraphel? So who is this? Who's Amraphel? So it seems like everybody agrees that Amraphel and Nimrod is the same person. We learned earlier in Lech Lecha that Nimrod was born. And Amraphel and Nimrod is the same person. But the question is, what was his real name? The machlokes between Rabbi Shmuel, was he Nimrod called Amraphel, or was he Amraphel called Nimrod? And Rabbi Shmuel, Chad Omar, one says, that would be Rav, says Nimrod Shmoy, that his name is really Nimrod. Like the Pasuk says when he was born. Why did we change? Why is his name called Amraphel? Omar, Amraphel is made up of two words. Omar Pul, Omar Vihipil Avram Avinu B'Tech Kivshana Ish, because he's the one that said, and they threw our father Avram into the furnace of the fire. So the Amraphel is based on that occurrence, what he did to Avram Avinu. Chad Omar on one hand, on the other one says, Shmuel says, Amraphel Shmoy, but his name is really Amraphel. The Lama Nikra Shmoy Nimrod. So why do we call him Nimrod? Shehimrid as called Ha'olam Kule Olam Malchuse, because he got the entire world to rebel against the kingdom of Hashem. So here, the Rebbe explains also, we have these two ideas coming to play. What is more important, the simple meaning of the words or the contents? Leuten Pirush HaPashut from the Werter. If you use the simple words, the simple meaning, it says V'kush Yolad Es Nimrod. That's where it says that Nimrod was born. In Noach, this is Lech Lecha Noach, where he's born over there, like everybody else. Kush Yolad Nimrod. Is Nimrod Veruba Deruba from the Neman, as majority of the majority, the great majority of all the names in the kapitel, in that chapter, in Torah Bechlal, and Torah in general, it's a name which we don't have to search for a reason. Why the people? The name or name, that's what they named them. So that would be the simple meaning of a Kush Yolad Nimrod. Then when it comes to Vahibim Amrafel, we read about the story, what happened. Visendik. And then Nimrod. We know that we're talking about Nimrod, the rebel, who's rebelling against Hashem. Is doch rufen him, und doch ruft him on the Torah mit Namen. And you see the Torah changes his name to something else. Torah calls him Amrafel. Muzman Zogun. So we have to say that Shina Hashem is Libatam. We have to say the name change has a reason. In them, which is hinted in the name that we changed, there has to be a name, a reason for the change, and that is hinted over here. The Riber, and therefore, Chad Omar, one says, Lama Nikro Shmoy Amrafel. That's Rav. Why is he called Amrafel over here? Sha'omar Nimrod, Sha'omar he said, and he threw Avram into the fire. So that would be the name and the simple translation. But when you start specifically looking at the contents and the subject, the idea of these psukim, as noch v'kush yoladas Nimrod, that after the Torah states that Kush gave built to Nimrod, the Torah the Torah continues immediately, and he explains how he rebelled against Hashem. He started being the giver in the land. He was a mighty side before Hashem against the day. This word said Nimrod Hashem. Torah describes at great length how Nimrod was rebellious against Hashem. That's why Shmuel comes and says no. As the Arichas HaSipur kommt mevayer sein, Why is the Torah over there telling you the great at length the story about him being a rebellious, that it's coming to explain for Bosar Haste why he's called Nimrod. But I can't go by Posik, by Hibim Amrofel. But when we come to the Posik, wo the Torah is Gornit Mamshich und Masbi wegen ihm befragt. The Torah does not continue and explain anything about him specifically, which we should be able to say why he's called Amrafel, is Das Shemoy. So over here, over there, where the Torah gives an explanation, that becomes the reason why we refer to him as Nimrod. But his name, where it says plain, is Amrafel. So because of the contents, Shmuel holds that overrides. Hey, also before we talk about Boras HaMachpelah, it says a double cave. So we also have a Machlokes Rav Shmuel. Chad Omar, one says, Rav says, that Shnei Botim Zeh Lifnim Mizeh. What does it mean, a double cave? A double cave means with two houses, two compartments. One compartment inside the other compartment. That makes it double. Chad Omar, and one says that what it means is Bayis Vali Al Gabo. That was a house, and then there was a second story on top of it. Mara says, understand one on top of each other. The Rebbe will explain all this very well. Hainu Machpelah. That's why it's double. Two stories, it's doubled. But the one who says that there's two, one inside the other, why is it called the double? There's two houses, one inside the other. And the Gemara says, Bezukas. And the Rebbe explains, they're also going by their view. Mitzad dem Poshet Taich fun Wort, Ma'oras, a cave, Hamachpelah is double. Ma'oras isn't talking about two caves. Ein Ma'ora, we're talking about one cave. It's a cave was an Halt in sich that contained within it a Doppelkeit, a double. Is there Pirush Kufula Bezugos, the meaning to say that it is doubled with piers, that you have several piers doubled, as state, basically, for Toppelte Kvorim. It means that those graves, those burial spaces, were meant for doubled, for Zugis, doubled, because there are piers there. Is mer masim, it's more fitting with the pirush bayis vali agabov than the meaning of a house and another attachment and an attic or a second floor on top of it. Ubefrat as zwei ma'ores einer auf der zweiter. If you have two caves, one on top of the other, gefinnen sich in der Erde. They're both caves. You have two stories in the cave. Is the Eberster Me'ora nip abhängig von der Unterster. The top cave doesn't hinge on the bottom one. Wie an Aliyah Fabayis, like an attic or second story in a house. A house, if you have the second story, you must have the bottom story to hold it up. So maybe you can call it a double house. You can call it a two-floor house. But a cave, the upper cave is in the ground as well. It's surrounded by the ground. If you don't have the bottom cave, you can still have the top cave. So why would it be called doubled? So mostly call it the Moras HaMachpelah doubled, not for two stories. That would not be a reason to call it. And simply Moras HaMachpelah means that it's a cave that is doubled, that has two kvarim in each one. The Riber Chad Omar, that's why one says, Shnei botim zelifnim izeh, two houses, one inside of the other one. Shekavula bezugis. So one says, Shnei Botim Zeh Lifnim Zeh, meaning that it has doubled. These two houses, each they had the compartments for doubles, for double zugis. That brings the Aron, the Gemara there, but this is enough for our discussion over here. So literally, Moras HaMachpelah means doubled with piers. But mitzad hemshech v'toichen ha'ksuvan, but when you take into consideration from the perspective of the flow and this contents, the subject of the psukim, is schwer einzuteichen odem pirush botim zelifnim mezek full of bezugis, one inside the other, that it's doubled with piers. From Avram's reid is given. Avram's words were the nusach from Bakosher. It came as a request. He was begging them. He was trying. So why in begging them would he add? He bowed to them and he spoke to them and he said, "Can you please nafshechem?" Was erbet is. What is he asking? He's only asking. He wants to bury his dead. He has one person to bury. To make it easier, his great pain, he has his wife Sarah to bury. That's what he's asking for. He wants to double the one, the Machpelah, 8 kvorim that has 8 burial places, kfula bezugas. And the 4 different piers that are lying over there. So over there seems more Abayis V'Aliyah. Abayis V'Aliyah makes more sense. That's why Shmuel takes that second view. But so based on that, but we can also explain in our case. So we need to understand why does the Torah introduce first, before the Torah starts telling the suffering of the Yidden, the Mitzrayim, the Torah tells us the detail from Vayokom Melech Chodesh HaMitzrayim. It's a new king. Why is the Torah telling us? The Torah doesn't just start telling you about the suffering. The Torah is trying to explain to you how is there such a change from all of a sudden the treatment of the Yidden and Mitzrayim to this treatment we're now. And why? Who need to angehen? Why does the pasuk not start bald noch? That they were fruitful and they were swarmed and they became so many and powerful. As the Rebbe, therefore, so therefore he said to his people, behold, the Jewish people are many and more powerful than us. Let's go seek advice to. So why do we need to tell us? What difference does it make if it's a new king or not? So why does the Torah introduce that? It's logical. The Torah wants to tell you how did it change so drastically. The Birbe Pashtus, simply explanation why the Torah says this introduction. This verse is coming to answer something surprising. These as Shaykh as Paris or Geisha as Elcha Gezeiris of Am Yisrael. How is it possible that Paris should decree such decrees of Am Yosef on Yosef's nation, Befrat, Bnei Yosef, and especially on the sons of Yosef? Noch the alle Tevis was Yosef had getan to him und Mitzrayim. After all the favors that Yosef has done to him, that's to Pare, and to all of the land of Mitzrayim. How could he turn on him like that? The Rebbe that told the Torah, that's what Torah introduces the story. Vayokom Melech Chodesh al Mitzrayim. There was a new king of Mitzrayim. Ashlo Yodas Yosef, who didn't know Yosef. Ubemela. And therefore, then it's not so surprising, not such a novelty. The introduction explains to you how he could decree such decrees on the Yid. And that's why Rashi brings the names of the authors of the statement of Rabbi Shmuel. But dos gitzu hasbora, that adds explanation in the Mchiluk and Yisrael for Yedin Pirush, in the difference and the advantage from each one of these commentaries is again l'shitosum, as they go and follow their view. Chad Omar l'shitosum is mefarish the Verta. One goes according to his view and he explains the words Vayokom Melech Chodesh Gomer Asher Lo Yodas Yosef, a new king. Kipshotom. He explains it literally. It says Oiv Gishtanan Anayer Melech Osot Yosef Midiken, a new king who did not know Yosef, when the Riberat or Gezegman the Alexandris, and therefore he decreed all these decrees. That would be the approach of Rav. In Klolus, Teuchen V'in Aksuvin is the Sobenit Verstandig. But when you take into consideration the general subject and the idea, the contents of these verses, then it's not understood. I feel as Zayin Dikanayer Melech, even if he was a new king, but the Zicher Gewus wegen Meise Yosef, he for sure knew about what Yosef did. Was hat geraten mit ganz Mitzrayim, that saved all of Egypt. Und was hat passiert mit der Ein Dörle Fneze, and that just happened one generation before. And this wasn't just that Pare concocted some sort, maybe he didn't know about it. This was all of the people of Egypt, so they knew what it was. Now what's going on? Befrat noch has the Gzeirot and angenommen zusammen mit Mitzrayim. He has taken it together. So there were a consensus of all the Egyptians. He said to his people, let's become wise and for the people to deal with the Jewish problem. Amongst them, there must have been such, they were by the acts of Yosef, and they were saved through him. So we need to say, even if it's a new king, that he had to pretend Kilo Lo Yoda. The Rebbe is V'chad Omar. The Rebbe says, "At the pasuk is nit belois ke'ein maimer hamuzgar." That this pasuk is not like a parenthesis, sort of an introduction of what it says further. According to the first one, it's just trying to give you the background. How could it be before they started to enslaving the Jewish people, because there was a new king, and he pretended he didn't know, pretended not to know. No. So as the pasuk for Entfeld, V'azoi Pare Yeked and the Exodus, pasuk is coming just to tell you how could Pare do it. So the pasuk is telling you a new king, and therefore he can do it. No. But no, their pasuk is their mit oisen. What we're trying this pasuk, according to is trying to tell you arois zu bringen the große Rishus from Pare. The pasuk is trying to express, to bring out how great the evilness of Pare. Behesem zum teuchen ha'inyan for the weite dike psukim, which fits with the contents, with the ideas of the psukim that follow. Was the Torah hoped on their tzel, the Torah hoped on starts itself. My timer is v'chad Omar Ados is der Zelber Melech. So he says, fitting into the context, he said like this: it's the same king. Nor osa atzmeki lo yoda. This expresses how evil they were. Not only did they plot against the Yidden, but how they can be so inconsiderate with the evilness that they have just benefited so much from Yosef. And yet he makes himself like he doesn't know you. My time is Chadomar. That expresses to you how evil Pare was. Same Pare, he's just been saved, he's just benefited, and yet he is pretending. Yaakov Melech Chodesh, he pretends like, no, I don't know. You've done nothing for us. And he's going to go ahead with the decrees against the Jewish people. Although this way, we're going to have to compromise on the meaning of the words Melech Chodesh, as the Smech is Chashu Gzeiroso. So it's not a new king, but a new king, but that is better and fitting more to the subject as it's in the pasuk. So basically, up to here, the Rebbe was explaining why Rashi brings down Rav and Shmuel, because that way we understand why Rav chooses to say Melech Chodesh, and why Shmuel chooses to say Nischat Gzeres. And the Rebbe goes further. This can explain an additional Rashi. Zayin. Based on this, we can explain another disagreement that Rashi brings in his commentary on the Torah, in nomen for Rabbi Shmuel, in the name of Rabbi Shmuel. Choch. Now the Rebbe says Rashi brings it down in the name of Rabbi Shmuel, but although as our girsa in the Gemara, like you said in Gemara, Medrash, it does a machlokes zwischen andere chachamim. It's other sages, not Rabbi Shmuel, but Rashi quotes it in the name of Rabbi Shmuel, and therefore the way Rashi quotes it, it fits in with the view of Rabbi Shmuel as we explained over here. This is from Pasuk Vayita Eshel V'Ve'er Shava. Says that Abraham planted this Eshel in Beersheba. So what is exactly Eshel? Is Rashi mefarish the word Eshel? Rashi explains what is the meaning of Eshel. Rav Shmuel, there's a Rav Shmuel. Chad Omar Pardes, that the Eshel means an orchard. Lahavi mimenu peiros la'orchim besuda, to bring from that orchard fruit for the guest for the meal. That was what he planted, an orchard. Chad Omar, and one says that it was a pundak. It was an inn, la'achsanya, to host. Uboy kol minei Michael, in it there were all kinds of food. So he planted an inn. Rashi says, so what is it? Planting usually is reserved for a tree or for an orchard. You don't plant inns or places to live in. But Rashi says, no. We do find the language of planting when it comes to tents. Rashi says, Shenemar brings a quote from a pasuk. So, how does this fit in with what we learned before? Mitzat pirush haposhut from the Verter Vayita Eshel. The simple meaning from Vayita Eshel, darf men lernen. We need to learn as dos is given a pardes from Pedus. This was a orchard of fruit. Und das ist Shita Chad Omar. That is the Shita of the one, Shita of Rav. I keep on saying Rav, even though the Rebbe says Chad Omar. Just for our brains, it's easier to associate. This is all based on what the Rebbe said, that the first one is Rav. I just find it easier to teach and to understand by using a name rather than saying one said and one said. So, in das is it Chad Omar for Rav. Omar v'chad Omar. But and one says, Shmuel says, Gate l'shitose. He goes according to his view. As mitzad toichenu mashmoes hakosu. That from the perspective of the subject matter and the meaning of the verse is Vayita Eshel beBeersheva Vayikra Shom b'Shem Hashem Kelelo. Verse says over there that he planted this Eshel in Beersheva and he called over there in the name of Hashem Kelelo. And Rashi explains, Rashi touched ois, that is through that Eshel that a God's name has been called out, is mer mistaber to lernen, so it makes more sense to learn. Ador etzich nit wegen boimer von Peres, nor wegen na pundik nach Sanya. Talks about more, not about trees of fruit, but a inn as a place to host for guests. Was dort is man eingestanden am in which people can stand there for some duration of some time. It called me all kinds of food. Was his massing, that would be fitting to Me'erizai, the Evrim Vishovim, to mention them, Everston, to encourage the passerbys, those passing by and returning to bless Hashem. I've called out Toives Halolu for all of these goods. Choch, although as Lifizeh is the word Vayita. According to this, the word Vayita planting, nit kalatik. It's not smooth, Yita means planting. But I've you need proof as it passed oil, that also on the word on an oil, we find the language well. So far, so good. But the Rebbe is going to say now this only fits in the Gemara, but not in Rashi. Because in Rashi doesn't quote all the time Rav and Shmuel, the names, and therefore Rashi's saying over here Rav and Shmuel is referring to something else, as the Rebbe will explain later on. Ches, At Khan, up till here is Benegeya to Gemara Medrash, Benegeya to the Gemara and the Medrash. The Lishitosi for Rabbi Shmuel, which is the view that follows Rabbi Shmuel. Benegeya lePirush Rashi ala Torah aber is schwer zu sagen. But as far as Rashi's in the commentary of the Torah, it's difficult to say. Ados is der Tam was Rashi bring do the name for Rabbi Shmuel. That this is the reason that Rashi brings here the names of Rabbi Shmuel to give us the general idea. Rashi is trying to explain to you that they're following their view that Rav goes by the meaning of the word and Shmuel goes by the subject matter. But if this was the reason, Rashi should have mentioned their names in jeden ort for a bringt eine von seine shittas. Every place that he brings their view should say their name and explain that this is the name. However, we only find as not in a tail erter mehanal, only in a portion of the above mentioned. Bringt Rashi Rabbi Shmuel Chad Omer v'Chad Omer. Only Rashi quotes this, that one says and one says. In Posuk Vayova Abayis Lasis Malachtoi. In the Posuk Vayova Abayis Malachtoi, Rashi and over there Rashi says, Parsha Seinu, and in our Parsha. Mashenkin in andere Erter, but in other places, bringt Rashi. So, from these that we mentioned before, in Parshas Noach by Nimrod and Posik Li is Giber. Over there, where it says Giber, where is Befarish, Lahamrit Kol Ha'olam HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that it was a Giber that he wanted to have the whole world rebel against the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Was there Chidush? What's the novelty? The Loik if Shutta Shal Mikra B'Kol Moker. In Vos Gevurah Direkt Tzachoi, it's not as the simple meaning of the pasuk, all everywhere. Talk about a warrior, we're talking about a strong person, a mighty person. So we're saying over here, he was a giver, not just in his power or might and strength. As giber do, Rashi made lahamrit is to rebel. Is mekoyred, Rashi's source from the name Nimrod, that comes from the name Nimrod. Uni parshas lech lecho beim Rofel. And in Parshas Lech Lecho B'Ayam Rofel, sagt Hu Nimrod, Shomer Avram, Pulu Techkiv Shen Eish. Go into the fire. Is mashma as Nimrod Shema. Over here is mashma that his name is Nimrod, and he only called him Amrofel because of the pool. So Rashi doesn't mention. So Rashi, it really seems like he explains the Lahamrit Lias Giber side, he's not explaining the name Nimrod. So it seems like Rashi learns like his name was Nimrod, and Amrophel is just what they called him because he said Avram Pul. That is the opinion of Rav. And Rashi doesn't mention. Ados hat gesagt Rav. Und das Shmuel. This Rav said, and that Shmuel said. Beis. Euch der Posik. Actually, I just saw in the order, the Rebbe actually is learning over here that these are both reasons, that Nimrod is a reason like Shmuel says, and Amrophel is a reason like Rav says. That's why the Rebbe says that Dos Hot Gizokt Rav and Dos Shmuel, the previous Rav and Shmuel. And the Rebbe in the order asks, you can't ask, so well, it's not like Rav and not like Shmuel. Because what was his name? Because we see Rashi chooses both. The Rebbe said we find this in other places. But that's the Rebbe deals with this in the Ha'ara. Akoponim, we have both opinions over there, aside from Rav and Shmuel. Rashi doesn't mention their name. If the names is the reason for their opinions, Rashi would say the names. Further, I've done Pasik Beis, I've done Pasik Moras Machpela, bringt beide Deyes beyachad. He brings both opinions together. Bayis Valiya al Gabov, a structure and an up on top of it, and Davaracha Shekfula Bezugas, and another opinion that was doubled with peers. And he doesn't say Rav and Shmuel. One said, Gimel. Also in Rashi's commentary, Megillah Esther, Taister in Shutishal Mikra v'Chad Omar. Over there, he just says like the second one, v'Chad Omar, and doesn't bring the cloud the day of Chad Omar from Rav. Doesn't bring that the Chad Omar the Shmuel. Muslimen sagen, as in the Erte will bring Rashi bringt ja the Nemen. For Rabbi Shmuel, you have to say where Rashi does bring the names of Rabbi Shmuel as the author of the statement. It does not as again the Shitos one out. That is not in order to explain that they follow this view that I mentioned before about whether the word is the main thing or the contents. Not in the Erte, but this is a idea that follows only in the places where Rashi brings it down. Or it's coming to answer a question from a sharp student in this particular place. So now the Rebbe explains the idea of bringing down the Rav Shmuel over here. Test. So what's the explanation in our case? Yaakov Melech Chodesh Geimer bepashtus, when the Torah writes a new king came, what is it coming to tell? Kumt. Arois Brengen is coming to bring out as the Sibah von Hoben is Chakmaloi, that the reason why they said we should consult what to do about the Jewish problem is the Rishus for Melech Mitzrayim va'amai. It's the evil of the king of Egypt and his people. Even if we should say that this was actually a new king, cannot say that Hitaka didn't know Yosef. So, meint as hat nicht gewusst und hat nicht gehört von Meise Yosef doesn't mean that he didn't know or he didn't hear what Yosef did. Was hat geratevet ganz Mitzrayim Canal that he saved all of Egypt, Kinis Khalil, as mentioned earlier. So, trying to express here over here how evil they were. Now, he was concerned, right? What was his concern? But his concern was really a concern. His concern, because they're going to, lest they multiply, they'll wage war and they'll leave Goimer. So even a 5-year-old who learning Chumash that has no basis. Borus is Teva b'nei Odom. As far as nature of people, somebody does you a favor, you don't pay him back with something bad, with evil. Men hat schon früher gelernt by Avraham v'Avimelech, as we already learned earlier by Avraham and Avimelech. Asuli der Teva was Avimelech had getan to Avraham, that because Avimelech did a favor to Avraham. He told him, my land is before you. Avraham has sworn to him, as a veton chesed v'toiv, he will do kindness and good. Not just Avimelech alone, also to the child and the grandchild and the people of the land that you live there. So meaning for the favor you go back and then gonna treat them back with kindness. So also in our case. Since they knew about the good conduct, how Pare, king of Egypt, treated Yosef and the Jewish people, Pare thought he was going to be Yosef from Beis HaSoyer. Pare has taken Yosef out from jail. And he made him into a second viceroy to the king. Such a way that without you, nobody will raise their hand and foot. And then, according to Paris' instruction, he settled the Jewish people in the best of the land of Goshen. His pashut is obvious as Melech Mitzrayim on Amram verstanden that the king of Egypt and his people understood as the Eden that the Jewish people afila der später, even in a generation later, well, their furnished Opzol are not going to pay back Tarah, something bad. So they're worried that they made up the worry. So therefore, it's very clear that his worry and his fear, Penyirbel, as they become most, is given an oisret. It's only an excuse. And the Sibis Agazedis give him its adrishus. And the reason for his decree was because of evilness. But here the question is, how does this evil express? What does it consist of? In Bosis Bashtanan der Ike Rishus from Pare. What was the main evil of Pare? Si ben Odom lamokim. Was it between person and Hashem, legabe the Medrashton, relative to Hashem, that it was his evilness? Or the Iker, or mainly ben Odom lachaver, between people and people, legabe towards the Jews? This is explained by hint. Through Rashi telling us, letting us know, as the zwei days for Rabbi Shmuel, that these two opinions are from Rabbi Shmuel, as the Rebbe will explain later on. That the Rav was mainly concerned between man and Hashem, halachic Rabbi Yisuri, and Shmuel was mainly concerned between men, halachic Shmuel b'dinim, b'mamanis, that interpersonal relationship. The Gemara zogt. The Gemara says, Hilchsa Rabbi Yisuri, that the halacha remains like Rav when there's machlokes Rav and Shmuel, when it comes to matters that are prohibited or permissible. Ukishmuel, but the halacha remains like Shmuel when it comes to bedina, when it comes to when it comes to monetary matters. So the Rishonim explain why is that so. Agam as oich Rav kipaskin yonim amonis. Rav also ruled in monetary matters. Unoich Shmuel and also Shmuel occupied themselves in prohibition and permissible. What is permissible? What is prohibited? Is over Shmuel hoyrogel tomid, but Shmuel was constantly accustomed. He was used to live sigdinim to rule judgments. That's why he was very particular in them. But he would descend into depth to maskel and kol davar emes. He would understand the truth and everything. Likewise, he was accustomed to very particular look into the instruction of prohibition and permissible. That's why they relied on the instructions of Rav when it comes to Isur V'Heter. This haste, as Rav hat sich bikar Isur gewen, that Rav mainly occupied himself. The farm mer medagde gewen, that's what was more particular, Isur V'Heter with Isur V'Heter. And by Shmuel is das bikar gewen in Inyonim for Dinim Amar. By Shmuel was mainly in matters of monetary issue. What's the difference? The chiluk between Isurei and Dinim Amar is. What's the difference between prohibitions and monetary issues? Isur V'Heter, prohibition and permission, is an inyan from Menod Lamokim. That's between a person and Hashem. Dinei Momenis, monetary issues, they mainly encompass the inyan from Menod Lachavere, the matters that are between man and his friend. Und der Riber, and therefore, when we talk about a matter, it has a connection. You can have a connection both between man and Hashem and between man and people. But the Rav Neitig and Oitzutaichun, so Rav tilted to translate it, it does it as it is from the perspective of prohibition between a person and Hashem. And Shmuel, he interpreted, he was inclined to do mitzad mamoina. So what's in our case? Yudalim. In our case. According to the interpretation, that it doesn't mean really a chodesh, like Shmuel, like the Machad Omar, that it wasn't really an Noris, the same king, is the Rishus ben Odom Lamokim Nitazei Grace. So over there, we're trying to tell you what a big Rashi is. But the Rishus to Hashem wasn't as great. Hobendik anamasla kamishmaya, because he had a masla excuse, not truth, but he had sort of a way to excuse himself for Hashem. The Bald Yaakov Avinu hat ihm abgegeben Koved Malchus. We're talking about the same king. Basically, he was accepted by Yaakov as a king. King Yaakov treated him, gave him honor for a king. When he came in, and also when he left, he entered Parei, and then the way he greeted him, and also before he left, he took his bracha. So as Rashi points out, so he treated Parei, that same Parei, as a king. He related to him as a king. He accepted his dominance. So he has therefore a right, according to his view, in his view, he can rule. He's the king, so he can do whatever he wants. He was accepted. So it's not so bad towards Yaakov for him to go around and make rules and change the rules for the Yid, because he's a king. But from this perspective, we want to try to make him look bad. Shmuel doesn't look bad so much from the heavenly perspective. Shmuel wants to make him look bad from the interpersonal relationship, because Shmuel is b'mamayna. So, as it relates to the Yidden and to the sons of Yosef especially, that excuse cannot answer these decrees. Since it's the same king, his friend, which Yosef, he did so much good and so much kindness. So therefore, the same king, the evilness, how could it be so evil to the same people that did him so much favors? So therefore, according to Shmuel, it's more expressed, it's the same king. It's more in the human side and not so much in the between him and Hashem. According to Chodesh Mamish, if it was a actual king, Was nicht ihm hat Yaakov gewesen Kofet Malchus. Yaakov had not shown to him, given him the honor of a king. Und nicht sein Melucha v'shlita hat die Bnei Yisrael angenommen und sich kommen mit Mitzrayim. And his kingdom and his dominance, the Bnei Yisrael had not accepted when they came to Mitzrayim. The only thing is, he became king while the Jews were still there. They hadn't come to his territory, to his kingdom, and accepted his covenant and his shlita. So he doesn't have any excuses. And towards Hashem to excuse and justify his decrees against the Jewish people. So that's pretty bad, Anuki. But as you talk about interpersonal between, is the rishus nicht as grace? It's not as evil. He's still a new king. He did not receive any favors of Yosef. He's moving. So based on this, understood. The Torah is madgish. The rishus on Paroi, since the Torah emphasizes the evilness of Paroi, is Ravos mitzad inyon Rav. His perspective, touched the rishus in Bnei Lamokim. He translates the evilness in between human, interpersonal relationship. A new king, which emphasizes how bad it's L'gabe Hashem. B'meila never accepted him. B'meila aggressor reached L'gabe Mokim. Shmuel aber was ikir asokov is given in the Nemomenis. The Shmuel, whose main occupation was monitor Benot Machavere, learned that Ados is given the Zalber Melech. He says the same king. But the new decrees, which shows us that in the interpersonal relationship, he was evil in that. And the Rebbe explains now the names of Rabbi Shmuel along the same sides in the previous Rashis. Pihanal Yudbeis. As I verstandlich, was Rashi bringt darauf the name for Rabbi Shmuel on this line, euch in the Friedrich zwei Machloikes in the two previous arguments. In Parshas Vayeshev, in Kavonos HaKosov, Arosh zu bringen, Sidkas Yosef. In the portion of Vayeshev, when the Torah wants to bring out the righteousness of Yosef, Hein, Fardem Posov Vayeva Baisagoibar. Both, before the Posik says he came to the house, in Hemshech HaSipur, and the flow of the story by Yifkideyu, Al Beisoy V'chol Yesh Leinosu B'Yodoi, he appointed him over his home, whatever he had, he gave in his hands. Gomer, Yazav Kol Asher Lo B'Yad Yosef, and Potiphar left everything that he had, what he owns in the hand of Yosef. He did not get involved in anything with Yosef. Batisa Ishes Adoinov, and the wife of his master raised their eyes. By Yemoin, he refused. By Yomer, he says, Gomer, how can I do this terrible, great, evil act? By Hikidabra, and it was as she spoke to him, Yom Yom, and he didn't listen. So the Torah talks all about Yosef's greatness and righteousness, that he did not cede to the requests and to the temptation of Potiphar's wife. Also later on, then the Torah erzählt, wie Yosef hat sich herausgerissen an Lauf von Eshes Potiphar, as Yosef tore away and escaped, ran away from the wife of Potiphar. Is in then the Machloikes im Pshat. So now we have, so this all expresses Yosef's righteousness. We have a posik. The Machloikes, what is the meaning from Vayove Abai Salasis Malachte? What does it mean he came to do work? See, she's given Malachte Mamish, was it coming to do work? Or the Lasis Rochavimo, to do his needs with her. Loit Rab, according to Rabbi, Balda Zikir in Yon is Sumad Gishaim. His main aspect is to emphasize, and to forewarn them, the interpersonal relation. It needs to turn out with that. It means his actual work. Unitz tzrochav imoy, and not his needs with her. It means actually work. This is mashma from itself as a cause of an ishma ansha that it means something else, as the Rebbe pointed out before. Damals volt as gemeint an isur klap ishmaya. Then it means that he came to do an isur towards Hashem. And we're talking about Yosef righteousness, and here he's coming to. So we have to say that came to actually do his work. According to Shmuel, however, whose main emphasis is to emphasize this monetary side, is Yumtok, then it is sweetens was Vayove Lasois Srochov Imo. He came to do his needs with her. That's what he came to. Davkeven in Ishman Shabai Shamabois, when there's nobody in home. From Demot, how does it ongirid ben Odom Lachaveri? Because then he came there because he did not violate his obligation. He had no other responsibility. If there were other people there, may need to do other things, but this way, nothing else there. So he says that he stayed righteous in the sense that because there was nobody there, okay, so he felt klapi shmaya, he wanted to do her, but he did not come to not do his job that he has to do, which would be a monetary. Same thing is in Yud Gimel. The Rebbe continues with Eshel. Rabbi Shmuel, Chadomar Pardes, Lavi Ben Peres. One says to bring food for the guest besuda for the meal, and Chadomar Pundik Lachsanya. One says an inn as a place to host, which had all kinds of fruit. Mitzad bein Odom Lachaveri is poshut. From the perspective between man and his friend is obvious. As Pundik Lachsanya Bokom in the Maila, that you're having a inn to host all kinds of fruit is aggressive Teva Mailafun, the apartments of Leis Pedus. It's a greater benefit and advantage than an orchard that only has fruit. The Idoch, on the other hand, is in the Pirush Vayita Chulu Pardes Love Men Pedus, but in the meaning of Vayita to bring a pardes to bring fruit, Mer Mudgesh Benod Lamako. There is more emphasis between a person and Hashem, Bordo Idoch Tzuki Kuman, because over here it was added that Benod Lamoke, because over here when you're planting it, Oich from Avram and Alain, also from Avram himself, the Mekolshkin from Vayove Kayin, the Pri Adam in Chal Hashem. Because the planting itself was an avoida, the Vayita Eshel. That itself, the Paris itself, the Mekolshkin from Vayove Kaim Pri Adam in Chal Hashem. So it's not just so this was also Avram. It wasn't just for the people over there. That planting of the fruit itself. I need to still figure this out a little bit. It's not so clear. Rebbe is very short over here. Und der Rebbe bringt dort Rashi the name of the Bala Memres. And that's why Rashi brings the names of the authors of the statements. Und bleibt is Davke, the Girsa Rabbi Shmuel, and he chooses specifically the version of Rabbi Shmuel, nitli the Girsa Lefanenu in Gemara, not as the version before us, Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Nechemia, that I mentioned before. But does get hasborin den tam on Yisra v'yend von the Perushim. This gives an explanation, a reason, an advantage in each one of the commentaries. So that the commentary from building a whole inn, a pundak, is more benod l'chaveri, and planting an orchard, the Shmuel is building something which Avram for Hashem. It's Vayita Eshel, and that's more lamok. So what's the Hira? Yudalit. The Hira from the Pirush Rashi b'Yimeinu Eid. It's a Hira from this Rashi nowadays. There are those that argue. As achois lonu bebeis hamelach. We got a sister, like by Esther. We have a sister in the house of the king. So he says, "And I have friend, a new friend, or an alter friend, or an old friend." If he makes a decree, God forbid, they don't have to be scared. Even though this is opposite of the Torah, you need to fulfill it. Well, you're being service to Pharaoh. You're building Pisaramsis. And Shtod instead to sein Evdei Havaye, Avdei Hashem, being servants of Hashem, durch lernen Torah basmod u'shkida, by learning Torah with diligence and devotion. Umekayim zeh mitzvahs behidr, and to fulfill mitzvahs in a perfection. B'chol drachacha de'eyu. So, what is the excuse? You're living in Egypt. You're living in the good of the land. Basically, if you can't, you're living here in this culture, this lifestyle, so you can't serve the Eibishter so much. Can't be devoted to Hashem to learn Torah, basmod u'shkida, kind of mitzvahs. You have to give in. Darf man wissen, dass es kein Aufgemein in it. You have to know it doesn't make a difference. It's not living an alt, whether it's an old king or it's an alter melech, a new king or an old king. Or he talks in this kind of style, another style. If he is a king of Egypt, which means Israel, they oppress, they make uncomfortable the Yidden. They make uncomfortable and trouble for Yiddishkeit. Is das ahoven itzchakma, loy for Yetzer Hara. This is a trick of the Yetzer Hara. Come on, chesed lu chatos, and the kindness of the nations is chatos. There's no good going to come from it. As darfum muzayin dan hoga from the miyaldos Hebrews. It needs to, and we must have the conduct of the Jewish midwives in Golus Mitzrayim, in the exile of Mitzrayim. Hepach zeres pare, against the Chizri of Prare. Prare decreed kol ben ayil yoret hashlechu. Throw in all the sons into the river, b'chol habas techayin, and all daughters you may live. And the Rebbe explained many times, Rebbe says, it's not just to throw in the Jewish children into the river, but also for the daughters to receive their chayis from Mitzrayim, but it's named Tifimo Geret. What does it mean? But throwing him into the Nile River, into the river, means to throw them into those matters that are the idol worship of Egypt. As it's known that the Nile River was the idol worship of the Egyptians. What does it mean in our world? Geld, you need money. Money is an idol. Stellas, jobs. So we wants to throw us into the river. These as Rahman was to the extent, God forbid, they trinken, they drowned in them. Not nor the Yiddish Guf, not only the Jewish body, nor the Yiddish Neshama, they also drowned the Jewish soul in that river of the Nile River. As also the second part, make them live. But das is part of the decree. Say by Lebanon and their tzin and them guys to Lebanon back from Mitzrayim. They vitalize and they educate them in the spirit, in the lifestyle of Egypt. But suddenly Israel. This is Mitzrayim. This makes uncomfortable for Israel. So we have to learn from the Miyaldis Ivris, the Miyaldis Ivris, the Jewish midwives. They stood against this decree. They did everything that's necessary. As sollen geboren werden idische Kinder. The Jewish children should be born. When sollen kriegen dem gerige idische Chinuch. Should get the proper Jewish education. Those was men darf ton in derech hateva, that which we need to do in the way of nature. Or to put in effort, to speak with non-Jews or similar. This has to be along the path as Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to Paro. Take, Agi gave him covet, he gave him honor, which he deserves. He had the godly stick in his hand. He also had the stick of Hashem in his hand. As he was talking respectful to him, he still carries that stick. That is with Jewish, godly pride and strength and force. Not to feel inferior for them going in front of the guy. And obviously, to try to hide your Yiddishkeit. Through this, that we don't consider the decrees of the country. It's talking here about education, to educate children in secular studies and other things like that. The Rebbe doesn't specify, but it's understood from the whole contents of here. Which doesn't fit, go along with Yiddishkeit. When we get up in Ganzen, you totally devote yourself for holy education. From alle Yiddische Kinder, from all Jewish children. You raise up the armies of Hashem, gesunte Yidden, healthy Jews, begashus and beruchnis, gam yachad, healthy both physically and spiritually together. Because those bring the geula. This brings the redemption, ha'amitis v'hashlema, the true and complete, from Klal Yisrael, from all of Israel. Adei Mashiach tzidkenu, to our righteous Mashiach, B'korev Mamesh, very soon. This is Mesichas Shabbos, Parshas Shemos Tovshin Lamed Vav.